Hello and welcome to Indie Designer Journal episode 9. Today we're going to be looking at multifunction cards, or cards that have more than one function. A lot of times they're used for scoring and then maybe taking an action, or basically it's a card that's doing double duty or sometimes triple duty. So we're going to look at some card games that I have in my collection behind me that use multifunction cards that I find to do a very good job of doing that. And then we're going to look at a couple of designs that I've designed in the past that uses multifunction cards and that I think that I had some success with. Why do I think that multifunction cards are such a valuable thing and worth discussing? Because for myself, I like to design small. I like to take an idea and find what's the most fun portion of that idea and use that as the building or foundation for my design. And I always attempt to make my designs as small as possible. Now, some designers like to add as much frills and things that add to maybe the theme, and I have no problem with that. But for myself, I always look at like my grand idea for a game, and I try to reduce it down. Now, my reason for that, one, is I think it's a challenge. The designer creative part of me sees it as some sort of problem to solve, where I have a vision of something and I want to reduce it down to basically the most fun portion of it. And how that works well for me is, as most of you know that follow me, I publish all my games through the Game Crafter, so there is a cost involved there. So the smaller that I'm able to design a game, the less expensive I can sell it for. So that price point is very important for me, and it's a balancing act, especially using a print-on-demand service like I do with the Game Crafter. I have to consciously be thinking about cost all the time. So I'm always looking for ways of cutting the corner, so to speak, but not actually reducing the what makes the game fun. So let's turn the camera around and we'll take a look at a few games from my collection and a couple of games I designed myself, and maybe we can learn something together here. Thanks. Okay, first up we're going to start with something real simple, and these are tiles from potentially my favorite game of all time, and that is Desolation. To keep track of the rounds, they use these tiles. Now, a lot of games will use cards, or usually they'll use a tracker of some sort. You're moving a pawn or a token of some sort to keep track of the rounds in your game. Now, Desolation has these tiles, and I've seen this before in other games, but this is just a really good example of it. And this is the entire stack of tiles, I think, that comes in the game. I'm pretty sure I haven't played this in quite a few months, maybe even a year. But you shuffle these up. There's a starting one that always happens first, but then you shuffle all of these up. You remove some, I believe, maybe based on player count, and then you have a stack of these tiles. And this can be done with cards. So this is why I'm bringing this up in a multi-function card video. A lot of games use a card to keep track of time. So every round you reveal a card. Sometimes it's an event card or something along that lines. Now, this is basically doing the same thing. So instead of just having a dial or moving a cube around, saying, oh, well, now we're on this turn, now we're on this round, okay, 10 rounds are over, the game's over. Using something like tiles or a card that has a function every round. So a random function is actually pretty fun, because then players don't know necessarily what's coming. But in Desolation, I'm pretty sure it's revealed at the beginning of the round, so you sort of have a goal for that round. So you can go either way with this. So you could say, well, the round's over, you reveal the card, and then you take whatever action. This one says it's a pilgrimage, and there's all different types of ones. There's an income round, there's another pilgrimage, there's another income, a plague occurs. So there's a whole bunch of different events that can occur. Now, this can be obviously whatever theme your game might potentially be. What's interesting is the two different ways you can do this. Is you could, like I said, at the end of the round, you could reveal it, and then everyone has to deal with that consequence. Not necessarily the greatest, but in some games, I feel like that could be create a lot of tension and indecision, which creates tension, and there's nothing more fun than tension in a game, in my opinion. So that can work in some scenarios or some themes. In Orleans, I'm pretty certain, like I said, it's been a while since I played, but I'm pretty certain this tile is revealed at the beginning of the round, and you sort of know what's coming, and then it's dealt with at the end of the round. And then once this stack is exhausted, and like I said, it's not quite as big as this when you're actually playing the game, then it triggers the end of the game. So I find, it's not necessarily a multifunction card, but in a way it is. It's taking on two duties. It's a tracker for the game's time, and it's also creating some sort of event or circumstance that's going to affect gameplay. So it's doing two things at once. So I think whenever you're able to do that in the game, you're just adding another layer of complexity that's welcome, I think. So if this were just a game where in Orleans, if they could potentially remove this and just have some sort of tracker that just moves along, and now we know it's this round, I don't know if that's quite as fun. It's definitely not as fun. This is more fun. This creates another layer of complexity, more decisions to be made. The more decisions you put on the player, the better, in my opinion. Lords of Waterdeep does a similar thing. Every round, I believe, you're adding a value to, or victory points to, the buildings that you can build each round, making some of them more enticing to build, because as those victory points pile up on them, you're like, well, maybe I don't want to build that particular building, but now if I build it, I get all these victory points. So there's lots of different ways to utilize this simple mechanic, but I think it was worth mentioning. So let's move on to the next. Okay, now we're moving on to probably my favorite small box game in the world, and that is Oh My Goods. Now, if you don't own this game, I ask you to please go on Amazon or go to Miniature Market or wherever you buy your games, or your local friendly game store, and pick up a copy of this. It's always under $20. Usually it's around $15. It's just cards, and look how small this box is. You can take it with you anywhere. Plays 2 to 4 players, and it's a great little Euro game. And the only way you can fit a Euro game into a box this small. Now, the whole point of this video really is to help designers create something potentially smaller, to save on costs to manufacture. Now, if you're like me and you're actually publishing your own games, this is obviously something I'm always conscious of. But as a designer, you should be conscious of it as well, because when you're pitching a game to a potential publisher, the less amount of components that are involved, the more enticing your design will be to them. Plus, it also looks like you're a pretty good designer and able to make a game that uses multifunction cards. So what does Oh My Goods do that I find so appealing? Well, it uses its cards in 3 different ways. It's pretty amazing. If you haven't played this game, like I said, you have to pick it up. So you have basically a stack of cards. There are some people that you can hire that I believe are removed. And you have your starting characters. Like I said, it's another game I haven't played in a while. So excuse me if I get some of my information on here wrong. But essentially, you start off with a building. I'm not sure which building it was that you start with, but it is, I should probably have had this figured out prior to hitting the record button. But essentially, you're going to have a building that you start with. It's not going to be worth this amount of value, but that's what you have. You have a building, you have a starting worker. Your worker itself is multifunction, which is amazing. So you can decide when you put your worker to work if you want to have them work efficiently, or you can flip the card around and you can have them work efficiently. So they're just going to do the minimum amount, but they're only going to produce 1 good. If you flip it this way, they'll produce 2 goods. How are you producing goods? You're trying to get these symbols to come up in the market. So this looks like some linen or something in a basket, and this is some clay. This produces some wood, and for every good that you produce, you'll have 2 victory points at the end of the game. Now, what's really fun about that or what's interesting about this is there's 2 basically rounds. You're flipping these cards over, and you're looking for suns that pop up down here. Now, here's a little half sun symbol, and hopefully this is all in frame. You have a little half sun symbol, and this is the dawn portion of the game. You're going to keep flipping cards over, until you get that second sun. Usually it doesn't go this long, but you never know. And there's the second sun. Now that means that's the dawn phase, and then players are going to utilize just this symbol portion of the card. They're going to look at that, and these are going to be available to all players. So you're going to look at your card and be like, well, I need 3 linen. There's only 2 out there. I need 1 clay. There's plenty of clay, so I'm going to be able to produce wood. It's a good thing that I placed the worker on this card. I think you placed the worker on after the dawn phase. I don't remember exactly, but essentially all the functions that are happening here is these cards are coming out of a main deck, and the only thing you're looking at is the symbols that all the players are going to be able to utilize to produce goods. The suns that pop up tell you is basically a timer mechanism that will tell you when to stop. Now you're going to repeat this phase for the evening, and then that pretty much ends the round, and you're going to produce things and buy workers and all sorts of stuff. But what I want to point out is the main point of this is this game is basically just a ton of cards that look just like this. Now they have different things that are building different things. They have different values, and you can chain those to do different other things. And you can build buildings because you have cards in your hand. I should have mentioned that you have cards in your hand, and this is the cost up here to actually build these different buildings. And once you build new buildings in your little village, you can you can decide where you want to put your workers to produce what types of goods. It's a very, very good game, and it's successful because of its use of a basic design that's being utilized in so many different ways. Now, I forgot to mention one last way it's used is every time you produce a good, well, what do you use to produce that good? The backside of the next card in the deck. Okay, so I produced the wood at the end of the round, or say I produced 2 woods. I just grabbed 2 cards. Doesn't matter what's on the bottom, and I have 2 goods. So the backs of all the cards are the goods themselves, and then you can use those goods to build other goods and do chains and stuff like that. It's a very complicated game to try to do a little tutorial on. But what I really want to focus on is this card is being used in the market to show what's available, and the sun tells you when to stop drawing cards. Very simple. The cards are also buildings that you have that are worth victory points. They have a cost to build, and they're producing goods. And then they have a chain where you can spend cards from your hand. So if I have more wood cards in my hand, I can produce more of these planks once I've done this first action. And then you're getting these worker cards that have 2 different ways of actually functioning. Your starting worker cards. So Alexander Pfister is a phenomenal designer, and to me this really shows how great he is as a designer, because he was able to take, I don't know exactly how many cards are in this game, 110, 120, somewhere in that realm, and he's created a game that takes a lot of thought, and it's got a really it's an engine building game, but it's got a really Euro feel to it in such a small package. So again, this game uses a card that shows you what's available in the market, has a timer, has a building that produces resources, and then the backs of all of them are the actual goods that you're keeping track of how many goods you have for scoring at the end of the game. So to me, this is probably the best example of a card being utilized in so many different ways. Let's move on to some that I designed. Okay, it's pretty difficult to show one of my designs after showing something that was designed by Alexander Pfister, but here we go anyways. This game is a design from mid-2000s. I don't know exactly what year, 2013, 2014, somewhere in that era or area, called Of Dungeons Deep. It's no longer available, but I may revisit it at some time because it does have some interesting things going for it. It was a deck builder. Deck builders were super, super hot at the time. They're still super hot. It's still one of my favorite mechanics to toy around with. As you can see, I used it in Gate, and probably will use it in future games as well. So what makes Of Dungeons Deep fun or different, and how does there a multi-use card involved? It is used in the enemies or the dungeon deck, I guess is what you would call it. Basically, when you start the game, you have your own hand, which I think is still interesting because you picked a main hero and then a henchman, and then you combine that, you shuffled those two decks together so you could be a wizard, and there was a bunch of different things you could be: wizard, barbarian, whatnot, as your main character, and there's 8 cards, and then you'd have a henchman, which was 4 cards, which would kind of supplement, kind of balance out your hero. You shuffle those together, and that would be your deck. It was a 2-player game. It played up to 4. But it was really built as a 2-player game, and you were battling over cards in the middle of the table that were in a line. Now, what makes this a good example of a multifunction card is these are the cards you're trying to battle over. So here we have an enemy card. This is a bandit. There's a little bit of flavor text. And then there's information here. It's health based on how many players, how much damage it does. I believe this was some sort of special ability that it did. I don't remember, or something that it was weak to. I honestly don't recall. And this here is how many victory points you got for defeating it. So every players would be playing cards blindly on either side of the card, and they would reveal, and whoever did the most damage would, and if the enemy actually ended up getting killed, then you would take the card. Now, it was a fun game because there was a little bit of bluffing involved where you could basically put low value cards on your side. Maybe your opponent did the same, and then the enemy, you wouldn't hit the target number to kill it, and then the enemy would do damage to the player who dealt the most damage but you weren't together successful in defeating it. But in any case, if you were able to defeat the bandit or whatever card it was, you would take this card and it would be added to your deck because you could see openly what loot it was carrying. So you would take this card and you'd flip it around 180 degrees, and then you would now have a crude buckler in your hand, which would have some sort of special ability. And it was a way of, that's how you did your deck building in this game. So every round you were adding a card or 2 potentially to your deck, and then eventually they would be shuffled into your draw pile like any other deck builder. But I thought that was a unique way of having some open information. You can see the enemy, all players, and then you could see what you were going to get, and that would determine how much effort or lack of effort you were going to put into trying to ascertain or gain that particular card. So every card would have an enemy on the top, and then whatever the treasure reward was, the new item that would be added to your deck. And there's all kinds of things: a dragon axe, a doppel wand. What do we got here? This would flip around. The Minotaur would flip around to a battle horn. And then you'd have a card like this. This is the treasure, which was a different thing altogether. It wasn't a multifunction card, so I really won't go over it too quickly. It was just more, you get a bunch of victory points if you were able to collect a bunch of treasure chests throughout the game. And there's a bunch of those, but most of the cards were made up of enemies, and they would have like a different item on the bottom. Here we go, scimitar. So that is of Dungeons Deep. How I utilized multifunction cards was essentially you had the enemy that you were facing, and you could see what you were going to get, and when you beat the enemy, if you were able to do it, this card would be added to your deck, making your character stronger or more versatile. Let's move on to the next game. Okay, and the last multi-function card that we're going to look at comes from one of my designs, Desolate, which is one of my more popular games. It is available on the Game Crafter now. And what we have here is our exploration deck, and that's what the kind of the meat and potatoes of the game. You're going to be exploring through this deck. You're going to be drawing 2. You're going to flip 1, deciding if you want to deal with that card. If you don't, you have to resolve the next card, or you can resolve this card, then you don't get to look at this card. So you basically work your way through the deck. That's the meat and potatoes of it. But there's a lot of multi-function things being done in this game because, again, I wanted to scale it down. I wanted to utilize the least amount of components as I possibly could. And like I said at the top of this video, I get a lot of satisfaction out of being able to create something big in a small package. So this is an example of that. So when you come in contact with an enemy, so this is going to be what we're going to be talking about. You fight an alien, they show there's a crate. This crate here is a large crate because it's a tough alien. The alien has a symbol here of a 5-sided dice. So to determine how much health this alien has, you're going to flip over the next conflict card, and you're going to put a dice here that shows this value. So there are all different values on these cards. Some have 6, some have all the way down to 1. So you'd grab a dice and you'd put a 6 here, and then this blank spot is you'd get a second dice and you'd put whatever is next to this card. So there's a little bit of like multifunction kind of being done here. You're using 2 different cards to create the actual health, or power I should say, or health of this alien. So no 2 aliens are going to be the same because you're going to be combining the health from this card with whatever health comes up in this card. Still something fun. I'm happy I was able to come up with that. It also shows you on this card how much damage, initial damage, this alien is going to do to you. That's 4 damage. I think that's the most damage that can be done. Now, both of these cards are also multifunction. This card tells us that if you defeat this enemy, you're going to get a large crate. Now, how do you determine what's inside? Let's say we defeated this enemy. We get a large crate. What's inside that large crate? It's what's the information on the bottom of the card, but not for this enemy. You have to reveal the other card. So we reveal the other card and we flip it around, and this has the expansion in it. So the expansion, there's a new item called scrap, so you would gain 2 scrap. But let's grab a different card here, hopefully a more normal card. So we'd get another conflict card. We flip it around, and then these are the items you would find in a large crate. You get both. So you'd get oxygen, +1 oxygen, and you'd also get a small ammo, +1 ammo. Now, had this been a weaker alien with less life, you would have gotten a small crate, and then you would have done the same thing. If you would have beaten them, you would have flipped over the next card, and you would have to choose between the 2 items. So that allows the player the ability to make a decision. The more decisions that you allow your players to make, the more tied that they're going to feel to the game, the more connection they're going to feel. And then when they lose in a miserable dying death, they feel like it's their own fault. And that's really, as game designers, especially for solo games, you always want the player to feel like it's their own fault. That's me joking a little bit there, but really, if they feel like it's luck, then they're not going to be pleased. You want them to feel, you can't do it completely, but you want them to make as many decisions as possible, so in the end that they feel like, well, I should have done this differently. Anyways, so yes, the main cards, the main meat and potatoes of this game is just a bunch of cards that have 2 sides to it, some sort of event or alien, and the treasure or reward. So obviously we're going to get a bunch of aliens, but there's other things as well. This must not have been shuffled. There's a sanctuary, there's a dark passage, there's a cold storage, there's a warehouse, and some of these items, like the warehouse, for instance, one of the item on the other side, if you happen to get it from a crate, is a power cell, which is what you're looking for to power up your escape shuttle. You need 5 of these to win the game. So it's one of the ways that you can gain a power cell in the game. Now, beyond just these exploration deck, the conflict deck also is multifunction. So I used it here and I used it here, and I had both cards sort of interact, as you saw. That's how when you determine the alien's actual health was based on both cards. If you don't kill the alien in your first hit, the alien gets to attack you again. Well, how much damage does it do? Well, it's not going to do this 4 initial damage. You're going to flip the next card, and you're going to flip, that's what this number here is. You're going to flip it the other way, and this is how much damage he does. If you don't defeat him again, then he's going to do this much damage, and then he's going to do this much damage, then he's going to do this much damage. So you're going to want to kill the alien as fast as you can, but that's going to cost you resources, blah, blah, blah. But essentially what I wanted to show you is I used multifunction cards in both the conflict deck and in the exploration deck, and that is basically the 2 main decks in the game outside of items, which are just static items that do different things for your character. So that is the last example I have of multifunction cards. Obviously it's not the only examples I have, but there's the only 4 that I wanted to share with you today. Please leave in the comments below examples of multifunction cards that you have found to be quite exciting in the comments below, and I'll definitely look into them. And again, thank you very much for stopping by. Thanks again for sticking around and watching this video. I hope that you learned something along with me. Again, as always, please leave comments below. I do the best that I can to reply to all comments. I like getting some dialogue going, especially when it comes to design, because there's lots of things that I don't know, and I'm learning a lot from you folks as well. Again, if you're liking this content, please subscribe, please leave comments, things of that nature. I'm not very good at self-promoting, but you know all the things by now if you're watching a YouTube video that will help me ascertain what content you guys like the best. So again, thank you very much for stopping by, and I'll see you next time.